Hey YouTubers, it's Charlie. So, a whole bunch of stuff happening today. You may have seen the news that Bryan Singer is leaving the X-Men franchise, and Fox is considering a total reboot of its universe. Continuity is a mess in the X-Men films. Wolverine is going to be changing forever when Hugh Jackman leaves the franchise. And even Deadpool, which should be a sure bet for them, is starting to crack at the seams a little bit with creative differences behind the scenes. So they're just considering wiping the slate clean and redoing things just like they did when they did X-Men First Class. So you have to remember that the original Bryan Singer X-Men movie was in the year 2000. So they've been developing it for a couple years before that. So late 90s to a 2000 premiere. They rebooted things with First Class in 2011, so it was a little over 10 years for them to completely try and reboot their universe, but then they backtracked a little bit with Days of Future Past because of all their pre-existing actors like Hugh Jackman, some of whom were still really popular at the box office. So I'll talk about that in a second, because I think that's led to a lot of the problems they're having right now, where you have the old guard that's still very popular in their own right, but aging very fast, and the new guard that you're trying to get off the ground so that you can plan for the next 10 years. So the Fox franchises are eating up track before people can lay it down in front of them. So the train is basically going off the rails. But the big second wind has been Deadpool. It was so successful, and it's a brand new thing for them, at least in this continuity. They've kind of rebooted Wolverine Origins, so that version of Deadpool doesn't exist anymore. But I think the Deadpool Days of Future Past McAvoy versus Stewart joke that Ryan Reynolds did is a good example of how big a mess their timeline is and how just wiping the slate clean can fix all that. So what's the deal with Bryan Singer? Supposedly he's leaving the franchise. What will probably happen is that he'll give them some creative tips along the way. He won't just go off to an island in the middle of the ocean and never speak to anyone again. He's just doing the Christopher Nolan thing where he feels like he's creatively done with the franchise, so he wants to step away. I would bet that Warner Brothers, even though Christopher Nolan isn't working on any of the DC films in any capacity, they still go to him for advice on new stuff they're doing. Like, there's no way that Ben Affleck did not ask Christopher Nolan for some helpful hints when he's making this new Batman film. So that's probably what Bryan Singer's gonna do going forward. He can still make good films. I just feel like creatively he's burnt out on X-Men IP. So what they should probably be doing is finding their own version of Geoff Johns to sort of chair the studio and shepherd all these comic book films so that they can be in the same continuity but all retain the tone that they need to for each of their films. And fun X-Men fact, we talk about Kevin Feige, all the work that he's done with Marvel, how successful they've been. Kevin Feige's very first job in Hollywood was as a low-level executive producer on the original Bryan Singer 2000 X-Men film. He said that when he saw the first raw cut of the film, the first raw edit, he thought that it would end his career in Hollywood forever. Little did he know, cut to now, he's one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. So it just goes to show you how things can go down. So like a Deadpool movie is always going to be very different from one of the main X-Men films. X-Men films tend to be family affairs, just like Captain America Civil War, the big Marvel films. But then you have characters like Wolverine who are better served by a slightly more hardcore, darker tone. So that's the real challenge. The same thing is happening with DC Comics. Like, can we make some films super serious? Batman does really well when his films are dark and gritty. Superman does not. So Fox just needs to find the point of crossover. So here's my first big idea for Fox just wiping the slate clean. So there's always been a question about who has the rights to the Kang character. He was a really big part of Apocalypse's origin story, so it was kind of a bummer that he was left out of the X-Men Apocalypse movie. But I feel like if Fox and Marvel can come to a sharing arrangement, Spider-Man style, they can let Fox use the Kang character, who is a time traveler, who can just completely reboot their universe, just mess with their timeline using time travel, so they can still do Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool movies, they can recast the Wolverine role and do X-23. I'll talk about that in a second, because Wolverine is like another big franchise that exists by itself. And then you can recast some of the main X-Men characters and retool that universe so that it's all in the same continuity. Because I feel like audiences are very forgiving of reboots as long as the new thing you give them is amazing, which is easier said than done. So I'd be totally happy if they just did not do another X-Men film for at least a couple more years while they figure this out. They can continue making the Deadpool movies unchanged, so they'll at least have that going on, even if they don't have X-Men films going on. And then they can wait a couple more years to reintroduce the Wolverine franchise with a recast version of the Logan character and X-23, just to build themselves out room for the future. Because I think if you're going to relaunch the X-Men universe, you really need to have like a 10-15 year plan. Marvel tends to think of it in phases. Fox needs to have an idea for their big arcs where they'd like things to go, even if they have to change their plans down the line. And it sounds like since First Class dropped back in 2011, they didn't have that plan, so the lack of planning has caused this complete mess now. But like I said, the Deadpool franchise is still doing really well. They're already planning sequels beyond the second Deadpool movie. Like they're introducing Cable in Deadpool 2. Cable, Domino, maybe a couple other characters. They've already said that they're developing Deadpool 3, just, ideas for the movie. They want to introduce X-Force in that, which I feel like is a good move for them. And if X-Force ends up being a big thing, they can spin that off into its own franchise too. They already talked about New Mutants, but that wasn't mentioned in this big universe reboot. But I'd be willing to bet that if they're going to be rebooting the X-Men films, then they'll postpone New Mutants until they get this all figured out. But it's a huge deal. I'll be really curious to see if this ever happens to Marvel. They sound like they have a plan for Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, the other A-list Avengers, leaving the franchise, recasting roles, but you don't really know until you get there. Like they say they have a lot of time before they have to worry about that. Disney and Marvel are machines when it comes to planning ahead. They have really deep pockets, so I don't think it's going to be too hard for them to keep actors around. And I definitely feel like Fox could benefit from a Jeff Johns, Kevin Feige type person who really understands the comic book characters, like the origins of the characters, even if they change things for the movies, who can bring about a unifying creative vision for the larger universe that also allows them to do, say, like Deadpool movies that get to be their own thing, Wolverine movies that get to be their own thing, in X-Men films that kind of bring everything together. So you just can't really do that unless you have someone that's powerful enough, like Kevin Feige, to make those decisions and say, this is what we're going to be doing with these characters. This is what the tone is going to be like. Let's find a director to bring that vision about. So let me know, what do you think about the idea of a complete X-Men Fox universe reboot? Now don't forget that Fantastic Four is in there too. I should have mentioned them, but that's also a franchise that's desperately in need of revitalizing. So there's just so many reasons why they should reboot their universe. I think it's just a question of whether or not they're going to pull the trigger and how much that's going to affect the stuff that they're already working on right now, like the Deadpool sequel. Relatively minor, I think. I think they're far enough along in Deadpool development that they're just going to let that be its own thing. And then for Deadpool 3, X-Force stuff, they'll try to slowly weave that in with whatever is happening with the X-Men at that time. But that would be somewhere in the early 2020s, so that's still a long ways off. So it's not like everybody's packing up and burning the bridge on the way out, Homer Simpson style. But you will probably hear about big X-Men changes throughout the rest of the year and early in next year. They tend to figure those big things out first. Then once they hire the right people, then they'll start making announcements like, hey, this is what's going to be happening with the X-Men franchise. They'll probably wait to talk about their Wolverine succession plan until well after the Wolverine movie comes out. They want Hugh Jackman to go out in style. So don't expect to hear too much about them recasting the Logan Wolverine for a long time. But what'll happen is I'll be doing more Deadpool videos towards the end of the year. They're really close to locking down their director. It's probably going to be the John Wick director that we talked about a couple weeks ago. So there'll be a bunch more Deadpool bonus videos for the rest of the year. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. Later tonight, there's a new Arrow episode, so that's going to be my next video to post. While you guys wait for that to post, you can click here to learn why the Deadpool 2 director left. And you can click here to learn all about Young Justice Season 3, which was just confirmed. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let's high five. I'll see you guys tonight.